setting a target date for your retirement is a significant milestone. It's a very important first step. But what comes next? How do you make sure that you've ticked off all the boxes as you prepare for this next chapter of your life? We meet with folks at different points of this pre-retirement journey all the time. Sometimes they're 5 years out and you still have a bit of time to build up a good plan, but other times they're kind of right on the door of retirement, maybe a few months away. And often the thing that they'll say is, man, I wish I had done this sooner. Where were you 4 years ago? So in this video, we'll help you prepare regardless of what stage you're at with a pre-retirement checklist. We're going to cover off what things you need to do when you're 5 years out, 3 years out, 2 years out, 1 year out, and 6 months out from that really important retirement date. We'll cover the financial pieces, of course, but I'll also flag for you some of the lifestyle kind of tweaks or maybe tests that you might want to give thought to just to make this transition as smooth and successful as possible. So let's dive in. So with the date set, you enter what we now call the retirement risk zone. The stakes are getting higher. It's important that you're making kind of good evidence-based planning decisions as you enter into this zone of your life. Research consistently shows that people who actually plan ahead for retirement have higher levels of confidence in their actual financial preparedness and are more likely to actually get where they want to go. The 2024 Retirement Confidence Survey by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, perhaps not surprisingly, found that of those who had a plan, 77% of them felt confident about their financial security in retirement. Now you compare that with those who didn't have a plan, well, just 34% of them felt that same amount of confidence, and 32% saying they're kind of straight up just not confident at all. And of course, you might say like, yeah, well, duh. Of course that's the case. But still, for many people, even those who've got a decent bit of income coming in and assets to support their life, they still feel uncertain. They still kind of struggle to take that step of actually running the numbers. They're kind of good research collectors, kind of like collectors of options and strategies and ideas. They've got a lot of ideas up here, but they're actually paralyzed by that choice. So let's cut through all of that and let's break out what needs to happen, and let's start out 5 years. So 5 years out, you want to aim to do these things. So first, you want to run a basic high-level plan. In this process, you're going to need to assess kind of your current amount of savings, your investments, and kind of just start up with a benchmark of knowing where you're at. So kind of create a balance sheet or maybe a net worth statement, summarize everything in kind of a reasonable amount of detail. Now, once you've got that done, you're going to focus on your spending habits. You're going to start thinking about how they might change in retirement. Will you travel extensively? Will you downsize your home? Will you pursue new hobbies? And we've done a lot of these videos in the past where we're kind of suggesting bucketing your retirement spending into 3 buckets to help kind of organize this thinking. I'll put a link to that video up here. And next, you should start thinking about where the income is going to be coming from to cover off those lifestyle needs. Most people will have 2 primary buckets, right? They'll have income from, defined benefit pensions or maybe government pensions like CPP, OAS, and then they'll have income that's going to come from their portfolio, their own financial assets. And at this point, kind of estimates are probably going to be okay, but the main thing that you're wanting to flag here is if you're just way off track. If you are, then you need the time, of course, to course correct. There are some reasonable online calculators out there to kind of give you a sense and if you're headed in the right direction or not. None of those, of course, are substitutes for kind of a comprehensive plan, but again, just to give you a head start. Now, second, 5 years out, you also want to be giving some thought to some lifestyle decisions. The people who transition best deliberately explore hobbies, interests, kind of volunteer opportunities, maybe even part-time work ahead of their actual retirement date. So that way they're not just starting from scratch on day one. It's also helpful at this stage to kind of give yourself permission to dream a little bit about kind of potential retirement locations. Not everyone stays in the same city that they lived in when they were working after they retire. Work was the thing to keep you there when you were working, but that doesn't need to be the case after you pull the plug. So here is your permission to dream a little bit. If not where you're at, where would you want to live? Again, this is a topic we've also talked about, kind of relocating in retirement and some of the things to think through. I'll put a link to that video up here as well. Finally, this is prime time to actually consider test driving retirement as well, with kind of a mini retirement if you're burnt out or exhausted. You might be looking at that exit 5 years out, and you might not even be sure if you can make it. So a shorter sabbatical or a pseudo kind of retirement fire drill here can really help kind of fill up your tires and give you back your mojo and give you the space. It can also force your work or your business to shed or reposition responsibilities off of your plate and allow you to kind of come back as a redefined and maybe in a refreshed spirit of sorts. You're not going to do this 1 to 2 years out from your retirement, but out here 5 years away, it kind of still makes sense if you wanted to fit that in. By the way, if we haven't ever met, my name's Steve Willems. I'm a wealth advisor with the Willems Wealth Planning Group out here in BC. We started this channel to help you plan for your own retirement, helping you think about how to plan and arrange your investments, your income streams, and ideally pay less tax along the way. Now let's flash forward 3 years away from retirement. What do you need to do here? Well, let's keep it short. So first, you want to start firming up some of these numbers that we did a couple years earlier. So you're going to want to start firming up your CPP. You'll want to pull your current CPP estimate from Service Canada. If you don't already have a My Service Canada account, you can go there, create a login, and pull down that data. That's going to be an important data point in your plan. You also want to continue tracking your spending. Over the last 2 years, you've probably started to see now with a little bit more awareness, kind of how lumpy expenses can creep up from time to time, and kind of maybe what a good annualized net of tax spending figure would be. And that needs to then be baked into your plan. Third, you're also going to want to make sure that your debt is on a path to elimination at this point, especially consumer debt, right? So vehicle loans and credit cards, but even mortgages, if you still have one. Debt, in the words of Morgan Housel, debt narrows the range of possible outcomes that you can endure over your life, but you are in the game of maximizing your outcomes in retirement, not narrowing them. So now is the time to make sure that you're on a path to having that debt fully paid down. At this point, your assets should also be growing nicely to the point where you can envision, perhaps as a rule of thumb, 30 times your annual portfolio spending being set aside in some sort of financial asset. So if you needed top-up portfolio income of, say, $50,000, you might have $1.5 million set aside to fund that reliably. Now that's lower than the 4% rule, often kind of cited as another back-of-the-napkin figure, which is to say that at this point, you do want to be moving past rules of thumb. You should be talking to a CFP professional who can actually help you run this analysis more thoroughly at this point. Now moving along, we're now 2 years away from retirement. What do you do now? Well, at this point, you can start thinking about asset allocation of your retirement buckets. What do I mean? Well, in the first year of a retirement, your plan should be anticipating where you're going to need to be drawing income from. So let's say your plan shows a large RIF draw in your first year of retirement. So you can push off the CPP and OAS for a couple of years. Well, if that's the case, it's no longer appropriate for your RIF to be sitting in 100% equities. You're going to need these funds available to you in 2 years. And so that asset mix should absolutely be changing to anticipate that future spending. So at this point, we typically go through kind of account by account, and we'd look at the current mix of assets in each of those accounts, and we would see what it is and also what it should be. And we would suggest kind of making some tweaks, again, informed on the basis of your financial plan. You don't have to be selling and repositioning assets either. Potentially, you could just do this by redirecting where your new savings is going into some of these more conservative investment vehicles just in the meantime, in preparation for that drawdown to come. At this point, all online retirement calculators won't do this level of work for you. And so if you'd like a hand reviewing to make sure that your assets are kind of bucketed appropriately to make sure they're ready for that upcoming retirement, every week we set aside a few hours of time to help folks in our YouTube audience, office hours of sorts, I guess you could call it. If you'd like to grab one of those time slots, I'll put a link in the description below for you to take advantage of that. At this point, it's also good to think about post-retirement insurance options. Some group plans are going to have a conversion option on their group plan. Maybe their health insurance or their health coverage to life or disability coverages. There's not going to be any blanket advice here. Every situation is going to be entirely unique. But now is a good time to start figuring out that stuff. Lifestyle-wise, now is actually also a great time to start spending actual time in those post-retirement areas. If earlier you were thinking about moving after you retired, go test it out now. Go for a vacation there. Go there on the weekends. Kind of set down some of those new routes beforehand. If a move wasn't in your cards, then you'll want to work to kind of define what kind of a post-retirement purpose you might actually pursue, right? Like what's going to be your why? Again, those who thrive have some way to answer this question. And if they're struggling with the answer, they at least acknowledge the importance of having a why. You have a why now, but what will it be then? Reinvesting in a relationship with your grandkids, maybe lead your local Rotary, mentor young professionals, plug back into your church, finally learn the difference between a perennial and an annual. It's up to you, but now's the time to start getting clear on all this stuff. Now, 1 year out, the rubber is hitting the road. The countdown clock on your phone is in there, less than a year. So a few steps to focus on here. If downsizing is in your plan, you're going to want to finalize the timing for that move. In general, we would absolutely suggest you do this after you retire, not concurrently, just to make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. At this point, your retirement withdrawal strategy, or what we would call kind of your decumulation plan, should also be really, really clear. You'll know where you're going to draw from, roughly how much, and that you've got the assets in those buckets invested appropriately based on that plan. Savings in this final year can go towards those retirement buckets, as we've talked about just a few minutes ago. They can also be used to pay down final debt amounts, or maybe build up a flex account, also as we've talked about in past videos here. Or they can just be set aside as cash for a little kind of pre-retirement splurge, maybe a bigger trip, a car upgrade, or something along those lines. A year out now is also a good time to be putting some of those estate planning pieces in place. This is typically right around when your net worth is going to be the largest, right? Right before you start drawing on your assets. And so you've got the most at stake if you botch your estate plan. So making sure your beneficiaries are properly listed on those registered plans and your insurance policies, preparing and updating your will, making sure you've got an enduring power of attorney in place, and even kind of tallying up all of the liabilities of your estate, right? All helpful and reasonable things to do at this point. Don't cut any corners here as well. Like, your situation may not seem complicated, but there are so many pitfalls and water cooler advice that trips people up here. So discuss this with a lawyer or another kind of professional advisor. Just as an example, last week we reviewed someone who got their estate plan kind of 90% of the way across the line. They're worth a couple $1 million. Included in that, they had a business and they had a reasonably sized and even positioned corporate-owned life insurance policy. But unfortunately, the beneficiary was incorrectly listed on that single life insurance policy, such that if he had passed away, it was going to cost his estate's beneficiaries a shocking $700,000 of unnecessary taxes purely by missing one single beneficiary field. And this individual was completely shocked by this. He had no clue this was the case. And so you have to have a plan for making sure this stuff is getting double checked. Now you're in the home stretch, so 6 months out from your retirement date. Woohoo! A couple final steps. You'll ultimately have to have a conversation with your employer just so that they're not kind of caught off guard by anything. Once you've done that, you can work with your financial planner or whomever to make sure that you've got the timing arranged to start up the replacement retirement paychecks to start coming in at the right time. You're going to want to start your paperwork for your government benefits around here as well. CPP will need to be applied for if that is in your plan at this point. OAS may need to be opted out of. They're going to act a little bit differently in that way. You can apply for both of these things 6 months in advance to start receiving those income sources. Now, in many cases, your work life and your personal life may be pretty intertwined by this point, so you're going to want to start to separate out those two things. Make sure that you've got a personal email address, personal phone number. You're starting to pull your personal data off that work computer. You're going to create kind of lines in the sand for your digital footprint. If you haven't already done this, it's often best practice to also get approved for a home equity line of credit, and now here while you're still working. The approval process now will be a little bit easier than when you're retired, and it'll serve as a good kind of backup plan for liquidity in case it's ever needed in the future. Now, at this point, you'll also naturally find yourself kind of disconnecting prematurely from your work, right? And that's probably fine, right? As responsibilities shouldn't be piling onto your plate at this point. They should be being removed. And just because this is such a big deal, just make sure to carve out a little bit of time to celebrate a little bit with staff, with friends, with your family, with whoever's important to you, right? This is one of those core memories. You'll remember this season of life forever. So try to do something to make it special, right? It's not just going to be another day. Maybe a harbor cruise, a client appreciation event, a surprise thing, food trucks. I don't care. But I just suggest take your first idea and then try to just upsize it a little bit. The point isn't to be opulent or self-indulgent or kind of it's all about me. Like, I get that. But I think it's fair for those around you who respect you, who value and appreciate your role in their life, kind of personally and professionally, just to throw a little party to kind of capture the significance of the day. So that's my 2 cents. I'll leave that there with you. So that's the Coles Notes on what you should be doing 5 years out, 3 years out, 2 years out, 1 year out, and then 6 months out. I hope that was helpful for you as you plan for your own retirement. I'd be curious if there's any key steps that I missed. I'm sure I did. I just tried to skinny this down as much as we can. For your experience, was there any kind of timing tips that you've kind of learned on your own journey? If so, just chuck those in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.